Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, April 21st, 2020. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, national correspondent for Time Magazine, Charlotte Alter, on the ones we've been waiting for, how a new generation of leaders transform America. Also on the program today, Trump seeks to suspend immigration, ban green cards and visas. Meanwhile, red states plan to open up within days, at least partially. And also, meanwhile, the vast majority of the country think the anti-lockdown protests are a joke and don't want to open up the country yet. Smithfield Processing defends its processing plant procedures and blames the COVID-19 cluster on cultural differences. Meanwhile, in Iowa, the National Guard is mobilized to protect its plants from cultural differences. Florida's unemployment regime failing catastrophically. Amazon-owned Whole Foods using heat maps to foil organizing by its workers as hundreds of Amazon workers stage a sick-out. AOC announces she will vote against the next bailout package. The question is, will more progressives follow? Trump administration denies college students SNAP waivers, leaving up to tens of thousands without food assistance. Oil prices go negative. Yes, negative dollars. And everybody's wondering, is Kim Jong-un near death? Trump's coronavirus task force now largely ignoring Trump. And a new study shows viewership of Sean Hannity versus Tucker Carlson correlates with a 20% increase in coronavirus deaths. All this and more on today's program. Welcome to the show, folks. Pleasure to have you here. Thanks for joining us. We got a busy day. Let's get right into this. Hope everyone is safe and doing well. Let's pick up on some of this sound. As I mentioned at the in the headlines, we have multiple states now are reopening. Yesterday, Brian Kemp from Georgia announced that gyms, hair salons, and other businesses can reopen on Friday in Georgia. They must adhere to social distancing guidelines and meet other safety standards. Good luck with that. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee said he would not be extending the state stay-at-home order, which expires April 30th. That is in 9 days. So on next Monday, there will be some businesses allowed to open as on Monday. In South Carolina, Governor Henry McMaster issued an executive order to reopen public beaches and allow some retail businesses to reopen beginning Monday with social distancing rules. And Greg Abbott announced, of course, last week that some retail businesses will open up this Friday, though schools will remain closed. It's going to be an interesting next couple of weeks, folks, because this is all geared towards creating pressure on blue states so that Donald Trump has someone to blame for the economic woes when they open up late, according to him. We shall see. In the meantime, there is this broad attempt by the right in this country to deny the reality of this virus. And, you know, the bottom line is you can say, let's kill Granny. Who cares about Granny? As if that was all that was at stake here, as if killing Granny was just, what are you going to do? As if like we just would regularly, you know, be willing to sacrifice our elderly, which is in no way to imply that those are the only people who are in danger here. But I mean, it's just sort of bizarre, the cavalier way that people are, let's just kill Granny. But also the delusion that that's the way it works. That we can just all go about our business and it's just mostly going to be Granny. It's insane. It's insanity. Here's Brian Kilmeade desperately trying to get anyone to agree with him. Oh, I know, say the producers. Let's invite on a doctor who will just say anything to get back onto our network. Here's Brian Kilmeade with Dr. Oz.
I wanted to see what you thought about this. Britt Hume said last night that there's a chance that the mitigation efforts of this lockdown have been a colossal public policy calamity, and the damage to the economy, to businesses that are closing, many not going to reopen. The damage is to kids who don't have their normal lives and can't go to school. Outstrip, my words, the benefit of shutting the country down. Is that a possibility that it has been a colossal error?
I don't think so, but also who would want to gamble with that many American lives? We saw what happened in New York when we shut the state down, when Governor Cuomo made that decision, and the same thing happened here in New Jersey. The numbers of cases that had been afflicted was tiny compared to what it is now. And we realized pretty quickly that you have a lot of lagging indicators when you're trying to predict the future in that setting. I don't think that gamble was worth taking, and who knows how many Americans would have perished. Now, we don't want to do it again. And that's why some of the insights in the CDC Opening America guidelines are so critical we adhere to. Because if we're sloppy about this, we will lose American lives, but also we'll lose the confidence of the American people. But we're better than that. I know we can make this happen. The game plan is and the blueprint is pretty clear.
Yeah, there's Brian Kilmeade trying to push this narrative. I mean, here's the other thing that people don't appreciate. We have 70% of the country now is saying like, yeah, I don't want to rush this. You can open up the furniture store, but people aren't going to necessarily go in and buy a new couch if they think that they're risking their lives in doing so. And certainly in some parts of the country, people have been completely untouched by this. They see it only on TV. And so they assume it can't be a problem and they'll go in. But broadly speaking, the folks need confidence to go back into the stores, and there's nothing different. The virus has not changed. Just because we all stayed inside for a couple of weeks, the virus doesn't say like, well, I guess it's just whatever. It's still there. Like Dr. Oz said, I can't believe I'm quoting him, but the bottom line is, even after starting the social distancing in New York, started March 13th, I guess had it started March 1st, you would have been able to avoid the over 10,000 deaths that we've had there. But how do you know? We certainly won't know. We certainly won't know that, shouldn't have opened up those set of retail outlets. I mean, this is what we're going to start to see, is we're going to see it opening up, and there's no feedback that's going to happen quick enough to get a sense of, have we opened up too much or too little, until we get testing. Apparently, the only place in the country that's going to have a decent number of tests is going to be, was it Maryland? Is that where Hogan's from? Or is it Delaware? I always get those two confused. Because, because his wife had some connections in South Korea, so they flew it in directly. Probably did not tell the federal government. Trump was pissed. Was supposed to run those through some subsidiary of Jared's or something. Hey, folks, for companies, governments, and even individuals, managing the ever-evolving cyber threat landscape can be the difference between thriving and being thwarted. Afternoon Cyber Tea with Ann Johnson has insights for CISOs and key decision makers striving to succeed amid rapid change without compromising security. Each week, Ann Johnson, Corporate Vice President for Cybersecurity Solutions at Microsoft, talks with cybersecurity thought leaders and influential industry experts to explore perspectives on implementing new tech, next-generation security risks, current trends, the future state of cybersecurity, all of it. Join Ann as she and her guests explore the risk and promise of tools and systems powered by AI, IoT, machine learning, and other emerging technology, as well as the impact on how humans work, how they communicate, consume information, and live in this era of digital transformation. I'll say, I wonder how many people are going to go back to work after this, as opposed to working at home. Look, it's not enough to keep up with cyber criminals. You need to stay a step ahead. Afternoon Cyber Tea is available on Apple Podcasts and Podcast One. Listen in to lead the future of security. And folks, listen, nobody knows more than I that it's hard to sit down and find time to read when it is not, a children's book that you're reading to your child. And even then, if it lasts for more than 15 minutes, I fall asleep. It's all workbooks for me, but I've talked to you about this before. There's an amazing app. It's called Blinkist. It's going to be your new secret weapon for learning new things, for bettering yourself, and for getting a grasp of certain ideas that are out there, certain timelines. Because Blinkist takes the best key takeaways, the need-to-know information from thousands of nonfiction books, condenses them down just to 15 minutes that you can read or listen to on your phone, on your tablet, on your computer browser, your web browser, the internet. Blinkist is made for busy people who want to get to the main points of book quickly, or for people who are busy or not busy and just don't want to invest a huge amount of time in a book that they feel like they just need the main takeaways. That's what it is for me. And you could do this during your commute. You can do it during your lunch break. You can do it during your exercise. You can do it in the 15 minutes that you're able to lock your kids out of your room. For me, I have made the decision that based upon my having to now do homeschooling for my kids, I am going to listen or read. I'll probably do both. I'll do one will be listen, one will be read, or I don't know how I'll break it up. But they've got Learn Better by Ulrich Boser, Ultra Learning by Scott Young, and Fluent in 3 Months by Benny Lewis. I don't know anything about those books, but all I'm going to have to do to get all of the main points of those books is to invest less than 45 minutes. Are you kidding me? Boom. With Blinkist, you get unlimited access to read or listen to a massive library of condensed nonfiction books, all for one low price. For a limited time, Blinkist has a special offer for just our audience. So you can check out one of my faves, The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. And I think I'm going to read the American Carnage on the front lines of the Republican Civil War and the Rise of President Trump by Tim Alberta. Look, I'm not terribly interested in hearing about all that stuff, but I'll take the key takeaways from that book. Maybe there's a story or two I wouldn't have known. Maybe I'll end up reading the book. For a limited time, Blinkist has a special offer for just our audience. Go to Blinkist.com/Majority Report. Try it for free for 7 days and save 25% off your new subscription. That's Blinkist, BLINKIST.com/Majority Report to start your 7-day free trial and then save 25% off of your new subscription. Sign up now at Blinkist.com/Majority Report. All right, quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Charlotte Alter, national correspondent for Time, on her new book, The Ones We've Been Waiting For, How a New Generation of Leaders Will Transform America. We'll be right back. We are back. Sam Cedar on the Majority Report. On the phone, it is a pleasure to welcome to the program Charlotte Alter. She's a national correspondent for Time Magazine, author of The Ones We've Been Waiting For, How a New Generation of Leaders Will Transform America. Welcome to the program, Charlotte.
Thanks so much for having me. So excited to be here.
Well, I'm happy to, I'm very excited to have you here too, actually, because I am sort of, as a Gen Xer, it's completely generation is completely neglected in the discourse of our society, and I would say with good reason, as far as I'm concerned. I am sort of fascinated by all the changes that are taking place, and am convinced that much of this has to do with sort of like just the structure of generations. But we will talk about that. Your book, you do a story, you essentially write, I guess, views of 10 politicians who are millennials and the events that sort of define who they are and presumably the millennial generation. Let's just start with this. What is a millennial?
Great question. So millennials were born between 1981 and 1996. So what I did for this book was I, at a certain point in 2017, I woke up and looked around and realized that our government was being led, was a government of old people, by old people, and for old people. And we had the oldest first-term president elected by graying white voters, enabled and encouraged by a Congress full of octogenarians. And I basically realized this is not going to last forever. There is a generational shift on the horizon. And so then I kind of set out to figure out what that generational shift might look like. And so I was specifically looking at elected leaders who fell into that age range, born between 1981 and 1996. So that included some familiar names like AOC and Pete Buttigieg, who both of them, I talked to them extensively for this book. People you might recognize from impeachment, like Elise Stefanik. I tried to make it bipartisan. Lauren Underwood is a Democrat who won a seat in Illinois. But there are also some people in here who you might not recognize who are, operating on the state and local level. And I figured it was important to include them too, because today's state senators are tomorrow's members of Congress and next week's senators. So it's important to kind of look a little bit beyond just the people who are the bold-faced names.
I wanted to hold off on this question, but I just can't help myself. Like, why skip to that generation? right? I mean,
Right.
I mean, that is the sort of the fascinating, I think, sort of dynamic that's going on here.
So, I didn't really mean for this book to be a skip of Gen X. It's like I would love for somebody to write the Gen X book. I would be the first person to read it, and this book is, certainly we're going to see, not certainly, I think we're probably going to see a Gen X president, like, people in Gen X are like Kamala Harris, Kirsten Gillibrand, Cory Booker are all in that age group. It seems pretty likely that they are the people who are, next in terms of higher office. But what we are seeing, and the point that I make in the book, is that right now millennials are because they are new to the scene and because they represent this kind of new dynamic force in American politics, they're having more impact on the conversation than Gen Xers who've already been around for a while. And so some of the shifts that
without a doubt, I mean, overwhelmingly so. But the thing is, Gen X never had that. I mean, I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. I'm not defensive about this at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't write a book about Gen X. Why would you?
Yeah.
There's nothing interesting happening there.
Yeah. So one thing that I, learned in doing a lot of research about generations for this book is that essentially there are big generations and little generations. And there are some generations that where they tend, and there's some, I'm trying to be careful about this because some of the research on this is a little bit dubious and kind of like overgeneralized. So I try to kind of talk about it without like, really giving it too much credence because it's really hard to talk about an entire generation of people, right?
Sure,
but there is some kind of theory on this that basically says that some generations are more like outward facing and civic and more about engaging with the structures of the world, like government and policy and things like that. And other generations are a little bit more inward focused and focused on things like spirituality and art and music and, like dealing with the inner world and less focused on sort of the public realm. And obviously there are many, many huge exceptions. You can list them off the top of your head. But, one possibility is that these bigger generations, like the greatest generation, the baby boomers, the millennials, tend to be a little bit more like, we're here, we're taking over, like it's our turn now. And the generations in between, which are, by the way, just smaller, like we're just
physically smaller. We're just talking about there's less people being born during a certain era. And that's basically it.
Exactly. Because what we're seeing because these generations I just listed, the greatest generation, the baby boomers, and then the millennials, that's like a reverberated baby boom, right? So there were just a ton of people, and in some ways, the generations that are in between Gen X and the silent generation, which is people born in like the 1930s who were kind of kids during World War II and didn't really serve in World War II, but they were alive then, but they were maybe 10 or 11 years old. Like there are just fewer people like that. Those were less fertile times, and so. If you look at the demographics, it goes a little bit like, it's like a little bit, it looks hilly kind of. And you have a spike with, obviously after World War II, there was a baby boom and a bunch of kids were born. And then the millennials are the kids of those kids.
Right. And so, I mean,
does that make sense?
Oh, yes, totally. I mean, my theory is simply that the size of the generation dictates their influence on culture. Both because they have the buying power and because if a generation like the boomers, there's so many of them that, after the boomers have had their turn, more boomers are there to take another turn, and then more boomers are there to take a turn, and they're eating up our turn in terms of the Gen Xers. And then all of a sudden, like our day has passed, we're too old to be relevant. And I'm not just talking about myself. I'm just saying this generally.
Absolutely. And like, listen, the idea that the boomers have held on for too long, like, definitely, that is definitely true. And I think you're right that there's a sense of like holding on, and then at a certain point, it's almost like the Prince Charles problem, where now he's been waiting for his turn for so long that he's not going to be a fresh-faced young leader. You know, he's gonna kind of take over from a position of has-beenness. But I also think that there is a lot of what I talk about in the book is that generations are not really defined. You know, obviously they are effectively defined by age factually. But what we're talking about when we talk about a generation is a cohort of people who have a similar set of shared experiences and a similar context in which they see the world, right? And that context is determined by the major historical events of the times in which they lived. So, for example, this is why arguments about socialism tend to fall along generational lines, and why when boomers start, spewing arguments about the Soviet Union and Russian aggression and things like that, like millennials' eyes glaze over and they're like, what are you talking about? Because they didn't live through the Cold War. They don't remember it at all. The oldest millennials were 9 when the Berlin Wall fell, right? So they have a totally different context for viewing some of these events and ideas. And I think you're totally right that the more people you have in that cohort who share that kind of, who share the same sensibilities and share the same context and lens through which they're viewing the world, the more powerful that lens becomes.
And I want to get to the specifics of your book, but this part of the conversation is fascinating to me, because I agree totally with what you're saying about the wall fell in, what was it, 91, I guess. And the idea of socialism means, as being something spooky, means nothing to people who were, 10 at that age. Although, with that said, Vietnam happened, we didn't leave Vietnam until I was 6. And Vietnam dominated all conversations between age 20 and 30 for me politically. Like, that was all about, it was all about, Bill Clinton, and it was all about how George Bush, we were getting past the Vietnam syndrome and this and that. And I think that's just another example of the boomers still dominating, well beyond their capacity. And had, I think, Gen X been bigger, we still might have had something to say about that. But I mean, really, I've had this conversation with Gen Xers. It's very rare that I find someone who's my age who hid under their desk. It was like the last time where that happened. Anybody just slightly younger than me. And I'm on one end of Gen X. But all right, so let's get to more of the specifics, because I'm really interested about a couple of these people. You start with 9/11, and I guess just talk about how 9/11 informs millennials' perspective.
So 9/11. Big geopolitical historical moments that they remember, right? They weren't alive for when JFK was assassinated. They weren't around for the fall of the Berlin Wall. They didn't live through World War II. This was the first moment that they, oftentimes as young as 12, AOC was in 7th grade when this happened, began to think of America's role in the world. And 9/11 also was a really important in the way, frankly, that I think coronavirus is going to be also, in terms of the world was divided into before 9/11 and after 9/11, in terms of the U.S. foreign policy posture, in terms of how people within the United States thought about national security and also thought about each other, in terms of whether people thought of the United States as a benign force for good in the world, which was something that had been discussed over and over. But now with the war on terror, like there was new doubt cast on whether, American foreign interference was moral or not. And so I think that, the reason I started the book on 9/11 is that millennials grew up in that aftermath. And there are very few millennials who really kind of developed their political ideology before 9/11. It was like it was in some ways the starting point for them. And I actually think coronavirus is going to be a very similar starting point for Gen Z. The thing, I think the rule of thumb for this is that kids, young children, or even teenagers really, generally are not paying, unless they're already activists and happen to be really politically active, kids are not paying that much attention to what goes on in Washington. They can't vote. They're not paying taxes. Most kids are not following it closely. The things that get kids' attention and the things that really wake kids up are the things that get school canceled, right?
Right.
And that's why, you don't ever hear, you would have to be like a really unusual kid to say like, well, when Barack Obama, negotiated the Iran deal, like that was a big moment for me. Like that's very rare, right? But school shootings, kids remember those. Big hurricanes that cancel school in New Orleans or in New York, kids remember those. 9/11, kids remember that. And coronavirus is going to be another thing like that. So I think for millennials, this was just the first big moment where a lot of these young people thought, hey, I'm living through something that is actually a part of history, and now I'm a part of it too.
I want to circle back to the coronavirus thing, because actually that was one of the things I wanted to ask you as to how that's going to impact how Z's reaction to millennials may shape what millennials end up doing. But you did look at there's a couple of people I want to talk about that that I'm really curious about. I mean, you talked to AOC, you talked to Merrick, who is the mayor of Ithaca, Braxton Winston, who is a member of the city council in Charlotte. But I'm really interested in the ones that are sort of contrary to the way that we perceive millennials on some level. So like Buttigieg, at least in terms of the way that he tried to portray himself, and Crenshaw and Stefanik. Those are the ones that really sort of fascinate me. So let's start with Buttigieg.
Yeah.
When did you start? Sure. When did you start covering Buttigieg, or I guess start to track his story?
So I started covering Buttigieg in 2017, so long before he was running for president, because essentially the first iteration of this book was a story I wrote in 2017 about millennial mayors. And it was about, what happens when millennials take over American cities? What changes? What do they do to the environmental development in that city? How do they handle housing? What, do they update municipal technology? Things like that. So I talked to him for a while for that story. And we kept in touch, and I could tell even back then, I could tell that he was angling for something bigger, right?
Well, he had run for DNC at that point, right? By 2017?
He was, yes. He was running for DNC chair, but by the time I talked to him, it was pretty clear it wasn't going anywhere.
Right.
Right. So I could tell that he was angling for something bigger. And we kept in touch, and I dropped in on him in 2018. We drove around South Bend together. He drove me around in his little sedan that was full of galleys of his book, and we had tacos, and it was like we were hanging out just like normal people, not like journalist and presidential candidate. Although obviously I was a journalist writing a book about him, which he knew, but and so then it was really interesting to see him kind of transform over the course of 2019 into this presidential candidate. And the thing that I found the most interesting about him is that a lot of the things that millennials in particular hate about Pete Buttigieg, that they think he feels inauthentic. They think he feels practiced. They think he's like Mr. Goody Goody who like never says the wrong thing. And he's like, too kind of polished. That is exactly the guy that I saw in 2017 and 2018. And I talked to literally everybody who's ever met him. I talked to his mother. I talked to his college roommates. I talked to his friends from middle school and elementary school. I talked to people who knew him when he was 2 years old. Like, everybody says the same thing about him, that's just what he's like. That's his personality. It's not like inauthentic. A show. Yes. And I think that the key fact to remember here is that this is a guy who lived in the closet in a conservative part of Indiana where he knew no other gay people for 33 years of his life. I think that's very astute. I think that is, and that is a characteristic, I think, that was much more common amongst gay folks in my age cohort and older. Because, but being in a small town changes that dynamic. I mean, it's a lagging, I think, experience for people. Yeah. And I think that, if you are gay in a community where you don't feel like you can be open about your sexuality, it creates this from a very young age. He was very conscious of how he presented in the world. He was very scripted. He was very on guard. So that guardedness that people sense about him, that I think a lot of millennials like read as fakeness, it actually isn't fake. It's a personality that he's developed from being in the closet for 33 decades of his life. But the other thing that I want to say about Pete Buttigieg, which I think is really interesting, is that in this presidential election, obviously, he was in the moderate lane, right? But in some ways, looking at somebody like Pete Buttigieg shows just how he is in some ways a bellwether for just how far millennials have pulled the Democratic Party to the left, right? Because the left is always going to be asking for the most left-wing thing, right? That's why they're the left. But Pete Buttigieg, again, a moderate, was asking for a public option on healthcare, massive government help with student loan forgiveness, massive government investment on climate change that included a ton of job creation. Those were all things that the Democratic Party in the 1990s never would have asked for, right? So for a moderate, a centrist, in the aughts, 10 years ago, even, the Democratic Party would have never asked for. Exactly. Right. So it in some ways, somebody like Pete Buttigieg, if he's in the center, like measuring where Pete Buttigieg is can help us understand how far the center of gravity has shifted. Like, obviously, he's still getting all this hate from progressives for not going further than he has. But in some ways, like, even though he's not the AOC and he's not the conversation driver for millennial progressives, he's an example of how successful they've been because if he's the up and coming young moderate, like, that's a lot of progress that they've made compared to moderates of previous generations. Right. If Pete Buttigieg is the right side of the Democratic Party going forward, that is indicative of huge leaps forward, without a doubt. And I think one of the things I like about millennials is that they don't necessarily, broadly speaking, appreciate that, and so they are relentless in pursuing more. That's one of the things I like about millennials in that respect. All right, so let's talk about let's move to the right, and I guess presumably it's Stefanik who's next, but she's actually sort of the more interesting to me than Crenshaw. So let's go to Crenshaw next. Because he's just sort of, I feel like Crenshaw could be more or less 20 years older, and it wouldn't make a difference in terms of how he presents.
Would it, or am I wrong?
I think you're right. I think yes and no. I mean, I do think the fact that he is a Afghanistan veteran makes a huge difference. Like, he's somebody who's very much of the wars that this generation fought. You know, I don't think that a Vietnam veteran would have the same kind of traction that he has right now.
Right.
And listen, those were wars that were fought by millennials. By and large, and some Gen Xers too, but they were defining wars for the millennial generation for the reasons I just described with 9/11, right? He's somebody who's really interesting because he in some ways represents the reaction. You know, like, listen, so when people talk about millennial politics, they tend to talk about AOC and Bernie Sanders and the squad, and obviously, that's covered in the book. There's a lot of that. You know, AOC is one of the main characters. I talked to her for a while about, you know, so, but I think that people tend to assume that, like, all millennials are like that, right? And in some ways, Dan Crenshaw was interesting and honestly really frustrating because it was it was interesting to see how much of his defense of Donald Trump was actually not about agreeing with Donald Trump. It was about hating the anti-Trump left. So it wasn't pro-Trump, it was anti-Trump. And it kind of opened up a lot about, and it revealed a lot about how, even though there has been this vigorous anti-Trump resistance that's been, you know, working alongside with this millennial progressive movement and a push for more social safety nets and a, you know, redefinition of what socialism could mean in the United States, and all of these kind of things that in the mainstream media and in the left-wing space seem to be like big steps forward, right? I don't think that very many progressives understand the extent to which there is a backlash to that, even among millennials, that will endure even when Trump is no longer president and even when this kind of old guard is gone. So I thought that was really interesting that he's pretty critical of Trump, not as critical as other people, obviously.
Right.
But it's mostly a reaction to what he perceives as like an overly sanctimonious left.
But I will say this, and I guess this is my point. That is not in any way a defining feature of the right in terms of millennials, in terms of generational, because you can go back and read blogs from 2006 and the concept that conservatives believe in nothing except for being against what the libs at that time were for was all over the place. I mean, in fact, I was on a show with Whitman, Christy Todd Whitman, in 2011, who told me that the reason why Republicans were not on board with the concept of climate change was because liberals were so in your face about it. I mean, that's the fascinating thing to me about a guy like Crenshaw. There is no difference between what Crenshaw's saying and what Rush Limbaugh was saying 15, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It was all their positions were always a function of, to own the libs, essentially. And that dynamic is enduring on the right. Like, that's the thing, is that he is not reacting as a conservative, as a millennial who's conservative. He's acting as a conservative who happens to be a millennial. Like,
exactly. I think you're totally right. And listen, not every aspect of millennial conservative politics or millennial politics in general is wholly new, right? Like, it's not like they're inventing an entirely new political discourse out of whole cloth. Like, obviously, they are taking strains of what have defined these movements before and updating them. I think that what is different about Crenshaw, and one of the reasons why he's somebody who is politically skilled and, has a future in a way that might scare some people who oppose him, is that he's able to quote own the libs in a way that is funny and disarming to them and totally negates their argument, but not mean in the way that Trump is. Trump does it in a really mean way, and Crenshaw doesn't do it in a nice way at all. But he's not quite as cruel as Trump is, or he doesn't present as cruel as Trump is, and he's able to utilize the internet in a very similar way that AOC does, right, where he on his Instagram stories will, you're totally right that the impulse is the same. The owning the libs impulse is not a new thing, but he's been able to kind of update it tonally in a way that is very appealing for a lot of young conservatives who maybe got to campus and don't know why they have to now be saying their pronouns at the beginning of every class, right? So he's kind of capturing that that sort of disaffected conservative impulse that's always been there, but he's making it not like those kids aren't going to go listen to Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh is not getting 18-year-old kids to go listen to him. Well, but they're listening.
They're listening to the people who basically learned at Limbaugh's knee. They're listening to Ben Shapiro. Yeah. They're listening to Eric Erickson. These are all people who worshipped Limbaugh and came from that school. That's why I think Stefanik is more interesting to me, or was. I think she's been overtaken. But Stefanik was someone who was actually trying to break from the orthodoxy of the right, it seems to me. And we should say she's a congresswoman, but I think it's from the 21st district up in New York. It is a maybe 70%, 65% rural district, if I remember correctly. And
it's extremely rural, yeah.
And she was trying to break, even from that context, right, was trying to break from, I think, the orthodoxy in a way that I don't perceive Crenshaw was. She ultimately, I think, failed. But tell us about Stefanik, because you had finished writing about her before I think she really basically, saw okay, I have only one path. But go ahead.
Right. So that was one of the trickiest parts of writing this book, is that, I finished, so the book came out in February. I finished writing it, it has to go to the presses a couple months before, right? So I finished writing it in November. And it was literally I could not make any more changes. And I knew that the president was going to be facing impeachment. I didn't know what was going to happen. Elise Stefanik was making these noises about being one of the president's biggest defenders, but I couldn't write about that because it hadn't happened yet, So I had to kind of write it in this very subtle way to sort of hint at something looming in the future, basically. But Elise Stefanik's evolution is a really interesting one. So there was, during the Obama era, this cohort of young, moderate Republicans who basically saw the writing on the wall with the Republican Party, especially after Romney's loss, right? So she had worked for George W. Bush and she works for Romney. She is a hardcore, old school Republican, right? And she basically decided, that, so the Republican Party in general had, published this now famous autopsy, which basically said, if we don't get more young people, women, and people of color into the Republican Party, we're going to have big problems. And now everyone laughs at that autopsy because then immediately afterwards, Trump was elected. But actually, in the long term, that autopsy was right. And Elise Stefanik was one of this cohort of young Republicans who was really trying to move the Republican Party in that direction, to recruit more women, to get more Hispanics and people of color into the party, to make it more appealing to young people, to not be the party of climate change denial, to not be the party of racism, right? And I think that she and others in that little cohort were very aware of trying to update the Republican Party's brand in a way that might appeal to young people who didn't want to go as far left as the Democrats were going, but also believed in climate science because, duh, And so for a while, before Trump, she was not on the Trump train in 2016. By the way, Elise Stefanik is an extremely skilled politician, extremely ambitious, extremely good at her job, and extremely sophisticated and careful about what she's doing. And the reason for that, I think, is that she's somebody who is very ambitious. She wants to go very far in politics, and she's a Republican in New York State, which means that she is most likely, it's going to be very hard for her to win statewide. It's going to be very hard for her to win a governor's seat. It's going to be very hard for her to win a Senate seat. So her path upwards is to move up within the Republican Party in the House and make it to House leadership, which it now seems like a very clear path for her, right? She's doing very well in the party. She absolutely could make that happen. But that meant that she is more attuned to where the Republican Party itself is going than, if she was, for example, a Republican in Michigan or in Wisconsin or in Tennessee, where she had a lot of other options for what she could run for, because it's a state that is where Republicans do better, right?
Right. So she's basically, she provides us, she's a weather vane for where the Republicans are headed.
Yes. But also she, but also she's an example of what could have been had the Republican Party not elected Trump, because there was this period where these young Republicans were getting together and saying, like, listen, let's provide a millennial Republican alternative to the Republican Party right now. Let's move the party into the 21st century. And Trump just totally nuked that. And now, listen, one of the most surprising things I found out when I was, and honestly, that has, Trump is the reason why the Republican Party is doing so badly with young people. I mean, half of young Republicans defected from the party from 2015 to 2017. So over the course of Trump's rise, and then half of those went back, and half.
So a quarter, a net quarter left. But
a quarter defected permanently, and a quarter had like a shaky alliance where they left and then they came back.
Can I push back on one concept here?
Sure.
And that is, I think it's actually it's not that Trump that Trump has changed the trajectory of the Republican Party. I really think it was that Trump was the trajectory of the Republican Party. I like the idea that, she, Elise may have had these ideas of what could have been, but she would have lost to the Dan Crenshaws. She would have lost to the reason why Donald Trump exists is not because he was, dropped down from a spaceship. The Republican Party was headed in this direction. It was headed in, and this was the Donald Trump was the culmination of the Republican Party. He was not in any way a divergence from where they were going. It's just that I think to a large extent, people were just not in touch with what was driving the Republican Party. And it was all on talk radio. And and George Bush knew it in 2005 when he tried to do immigration reform. He found out that the Republican Party that he thought existed was not there. And I think to a large extent, and also with Harriet Miers and whatnot, I think they were trying in 2005 to make that pivot and for the sake of the Republican Party. And I think he and Karl Rove found out like, we're too late. The ball is rolling in this direction. And they were largely or at least in part responsible for it. So, but I just don't think that absent Trump, the Stefanik's would have been able to follow the path that they were, that they may have wanted to. I think they would have lost. It wouldn't have been to Trump. Maybe it would have been to Tom Cotton. Maybe it would have been to Ted Cruz. But I just don't think that, and because frankly, anybody else in that field would have lost to Hillary Clinton. And all that would have happened with the Republican Party is they would have moved further to, wherever Trump was. Maybe some of the specifics would be different. Maybe they'd be pretending that they cared about the deficit at this point. But I think she was doomed. I think what we saw with her with Trump in this turn was inevitable. It may have looked a little bit different, but that turn was inevitable. There's no room for that in the Republican Party.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly, she was tiptoeing that line for a while. I mean, what I would say is that I think that this is, and this is why, people always ask me, well, what does your book mean for the next election, right? And the truth is, this isn't a book about any particular election or who would have won the presidency in 2016 or 2020 or 2024. It's about the broader trends of if we know that nobody lives forever, right? And we know that the younger generation coming up, according to polls, broadly believe in climate change, broadly believe in racial equity, broadly believe in women's rights, broadly, support immigration reform of some kind, broadly are struggling with student debt, right? We know that those things are true. I think what she was trying to do, which I think you're right, she failed at, and I think there's a debate to be had about whether she was doomed to fail, was that she was trying to say, okay, well, given that we know this about the up and coming generation, what are going to be the conservative solutions to those problems? We're always going to be Republicans, but we have to be, instead of fighting the battles of the past, like fighting over marriage equality and whether, same-sex couples can get married, which is totally a battle of the past that the millennial Republican Party is not at all concerned with relitigating. She and people like Carlos Curbelo and this very small handful of millennial Republicans were like, okay, we are conservatives. We are small government conservative Republicans, but we see the writing on the wall. We know that people our age care about these set of things. What are going to be our small government conservative solutions to those problems? And I think what Trump did was he just kind of dialed everything back to the 1990s. And he was trying to, fight old fights and pick old wounds and inflame old resentments. And I think that you're right that definitely worked, obviously. But I do think that as time goes on, there are going to be fewer, 10 years from now, there aren't going to be a lot of people who are that interested in relitigating, Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky in the way that Bill Clinton's sex affairs were, something that became a big issue in the 2016 election. And so that's kind of the gist of this book, is that, things are moving forward. This too shall pass. There is a new generation with a new set of attitudes that's informed by the historical events of their lifetime. And, the political debates of the future will be more about that than they are about what happened in the 1990s and the early aughts.
Well, I will make a prediction of my own, and it's somewhat facetious, but it's going to be that for that generation, it will be an argument as to whether Kamala Harris was actually born in this country. In the event that she ends up as VP, I mean, I think that is, as much as the Clintons certainly were implicated in the past 5 or 6 years, the fact that Barack Obama was an African American in office, I think, was sort of a stalwart feature of the right in this country. I mean, John Boehner refused to censure a half a dozen of his people in his caucus who were raising legislation about the president being born in this country. And there's no reason why theoretically he shouldn't have been able to say, yeah, those 5 guys shouldn't do this, unless that was representative of something bigger that was happening in that party. But I think it's a fascinating look at a generation that I can't wait to get in power. And I'm also, it's going to be curious, like you say, to see how this lesson, I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I think she's certainly going to understand that we are connected in a way that I think generations prior to hers haven't. And that's going to dovetail nicely, I think, with the push from where the energy is in this generation, which is to pushing more communitarian policies for our government. But Charlotte, thank you so much for your time. The book
Thanks so much for having me.
The ones we've been waiting for, How a New Generation of Leaders Will Transform America. We will put a link at majority.fm. Charlotte Alter, thanks again for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
All right, folks, we're going to take a break in just a moment. Head to the fun half. Just a reminder, this program relies on your support. We've had this is a very difficult time for people, and we have lost some members, and we have some people who are stepping up. Very much appreciated. Obviously, things from an advertising end, not great, not apocalyptic, but things on YouTube are a little bit tricky, and we're working on trying to figure out maybe how we deal with that. But it is ultimately our members who make this show possible. You can become one by going to jointhemajorityreport.com, and we have a number of different payment options there now. And Kyle has been working the back end. Things are going quite well in that regard. Also, of course, we have the app. You can check that out, majorityapp.com. Sign up for the AM Quickie. You can subscribe for free. It's on iTunes, or you can see it on our YouTube channel. You can get it on Stitcher, wherever. Check it out. We're hoping, to sell some advertising against that. If there are people who are out there who are advertising, hopefully that will come about. And again, if you are someone who wants the fun half and you don't have the financial means, or you're worried about your job, or you have any type of financial stress, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. We will hook you up. Just to have a little patience. Sometimes it takes us a little while to dig stuff out, and but we will get to it. I promise you. Also, check out TMBS tonight live on YouTube.com, The Michael Brooks Show. Check it out at patreon.com/TMBS.
Cornell West, folks.
Cornell West is on tonight.
Live tonight.
Exciting.
Yep.
Very exciting. Not in studio, of course.
Nope. Yeah.
That's good.
Michael's going to break social distancing by having Cornell West come over.
Cornell West on TMBS tonight, so check that out. Also,
she's on the line. Do you want me to bring her on?
Yeah. Nomiki, come on.
Right.
In the meantime, check out the Antifada, patreon.com/the Antifada. Nomiki's going to join me in the fun half, but Nomiki, what's on par for the Nomiki show?
Hi. That was quick. What's on par for the Nomiki show? Oh, this week's really juicy. We have David Sirota. That interview just posted after his little Twitter debacle with other senior staffers from the Bernie Sanders campaign. We try to get to the bottom of that, what's going on over there. It's all about power, how we utilize our power as a movement right now. I mean, we could sit here and we could assess the past and point fingers and blame, but that's kind of what they want us to do, is to divide ourselves up so we can lose progress for another generation or two, which of course we don't have time for. So the show is very much focused on power, how to organize, how to keep solidarity and not let the right wing and the neoliberals divide us. So that's pretty much the next 2 episodes. Every single guest we have on is going to illustrate that.
Sweet. And Matt, what's happening on Literary Hangover, or the Literary Hangover Twitch stream?
Well, in preparation for the next Literary Hangover proper episode on Daniel Defoe's A Journal of the Plague Year, which is a 1722 fictional narrative about, living through a plague. I am going to be playing...
Can you imagine?
Appropriate.
I am going to be playing A Plague's Tale: Innocence, a video game that has you living through a plague. So it's very appropriate stuff, folks. It's going to be the next few nights on Twitter. Probably not tonight because we got TMBS tonight, but next few days I'll be twitching that. I'll be playing the game while listening to that.
Wasn't that what Doom was about?
Doom?
What was that game? Doom.
I don't know. The new Doom doesn't have many plague elements, at least.
I feel like that was a biohazard.
I think that's what Frogger was about.
Doom Biohazard.
I'm not a gamer. I know.
This stuff is really coming back to me. Yeah.
Nice haircut, Sam.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate that.
Did you do it?
Well, my daughter and I did it. She took this divot out of the side of my head, and then I sort of did the rest. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll head to the fun half. We'll be right back in a moment. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457-238-56-27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way. Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
God,
You're not going to win them.
we're back. Well, you know, you will. But the point is, it's like, at what cost? We are back. Sam Cedar on the Majority Report. It's the fun half. But I already got myself so worked up in the break that I don't know if I can have any fun. I'm mad now. I'm really mad.
Why are you mad, Sam?
Let's just start with this and maybe we can get it out of my system. All right.
Okay.
So I was telling Nomaki that my ability to say your name now, like I can't even say it anyway. I can only say it like multiple different wrong names. Wait.
Someone has to do a remix of it.
Nomi.
That's what I
was
offered.
telling Nomi that she said, like, do you have those ads? The Biden one on China, which we sort of touched on the other day, and I think that's just like, you know, with Biden, I can at least understand the strategy of just have him be on the sideline, have him do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get in the way. Like, I don't agree with it, but like I can understand it. Nancy Pelosi, like, but somebody in the Democratic Party has to do something.
Right.
Has to project that they can run government, that they have to take not just advantage, but take some responsibility. The country, this is not an illusion. This is not, there's real things happening here. And there is leverage points, and that needs to be exploited. And you need to communicate this to the American public. This whole thing of like, well, there'll be this slow if it is just made on how, if the Democrats come into power just based upon Donald Trump fumbling the ball, as it were, the Democrats are not going to be able to maintain or build upon power in any fashion, because there's no direction for what they're doing. There's no explanation for what they're doing. And so Nomi and I were talking about this. She said, and the Republican ad about Nancy Pelosi. And I said, I hadn't even seen the ad until this morning. Last night, I had saw for the first time Nancy Pelosi being on the later show or whatever it is on CBS with that British guy from In the Woods. That's the only way I know him from. And because it's a kid's movie. And
thank you. I didn't know
and like, I thought, well, how bad could it be that she's on there? And like, good, she's out there. And it's all just about what she's like stored up for the quarantine. And she's standing in front of her multiple sub-zero refrigerators and opens up a thing just like full of ice cream, which is also sort of like, wait a second, do you think that she went down to the supermarket and got all these frozen foods? And like, it's just like reeked of, of just an enormous amount of privilege, and just like, who is she addressing?
Isn't she's the second wealthiest or third wealthiest Congress member? Isn't that correct? I mean, she's
incredibly wealthy.
Incredibly wealthy.
It's like, do you really need to show that off at a time where 30 some odd million Americans have lost their jobs, where people are lining up with cars and cars and cars and cars and cars of people looking for food, where there are pictures in Brooklyn of food banks that are just like overflowing? Like, honestly, do you have any sense of what's going on in the country right now? Like, who is it that you're addressing at this moment? And who are you telling to basically go suck it? And the Republicans have already made an ad about this, and it is undercutting her from the left. We are seeing a rerun, and maybe it won't. It's certainly not going to help. It may not hurt as much as it did in 2016, but to basically say, screw those 40 million people, we're going for those people in the suburbs of Philadelphia who also have 2 sub-zero fridges and are going to appreciate. And here's the Republican ad that has already been cut from her appearance.
We turn now to that $350 billion fund to help small businesses and its workers get through the shutdown.
It will be up to Congress to restock it.
But Democrats blocking that move this morning.
They asked for $250 billion in 48 hours. I said, well, I don't think so. They objected, and I congratulate the Senate Democrats.
Speaker Pelosi, what are you going to share with us from your home?
Chocolate candy.
Thousands have been forced to wait for hours at food banks all across the country.
This is chocolate, and then we have some other chocolate here. We just got it restocked, the ice cream.
You don't want to eat up everything all at one time.
I can't do it much longer. I'm trying so hard.
We're, shall we say, enjoying.
Having to admit that, we're starving, and
I like it better than anything else.
Taping this segment, there are 22 million people out of work.
This specific program is about stopping job losses today.
This is hurting people bad.
Other people in our family go for some other flavors, but
right now it's survival move. You don't know where that next something else is going to come from.
I don't know what I would have done if ice cream were not invented. I just wonder.
Unreal.
I mean, I'll tell you something. That is one of the fairest ads I've ever seen by anybody. This is like criminally, politically like malfeasant. And I mean, I just honestly,
But it doesn't even, I mean, Sam, I don't even think this is about the suburban woman, because there are two women that the Republicans have painted as the enemy for the last 25 years, Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi, and it's soon to be AOC, who is, filled the void of Hillary Clinton not being on Fox News all day long. And she still is. So I just don't think with that legacy of branding against Pelosi, they're going to somehow win over the suburban wealthy housewife. I mean, the reality is, and this is just historically how it seems to turn. Number one, that vote didn't actually lose Hillary the election. They wanted that vote to win her the election, and they didn't get it. They also didn't get the working class base, which, of course, this ad just illustrates they're probably not going to get again, because the Democrats have just proven to be. I mean, she even has a sweater around her neck. Like, did she just get off the golf course?
It's just unbelievable. Is there anybody associated with her that understands even like the slightest bit of politics, but also like what the fuck is going on in the country?
Yeah.
Like, I can't.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable to me.
But meanwhile, what's interesting about Republicans, and this is what they've been masterful at, is you have Donald Trump with his gold shrined everything. He is able to talk populist and have his wealth, but there's something about like you too can become Donald Trump if you work hard and target the Republican or Democrats. There's something about their narrative that is aspirational and our narrative, which is out of touch. I mean,
well,
it could
because I mean,
talk about economic
the reason
issues.
is, I mean, and I don't agree, but I can tell you, like, the difference is that he says he's a business person.
Right.
And Nancy Pelosi's not out there saying, I'm a business person. Look at my stocked fridge. She's like, I'm the person who's in charge of making sure that people fucking eat.
Right.
And all I am concerned about is how much fucking ice cream I have in my freezer. Like, we shouldn't have started with this, because honestly, like,
yeah. Someone just texted me, Sam Finkelstein just texted me that his car is, that Pelosi's refrigerator, just one of them, is worth more than his car. And his car is from 2015. The refrigerator is over $20,000.
It's just so, I mean, this is beyond, like, it is beyond their failure. This is beyond incompetence. Like, you cannot get this incompetent. It's just stunning. It's just stunning. I mean, the absence of anybody, like, okay, Joe Biden does not have the ability to do a web show where he can bring on people instead of, like, let's just pretend for a moment I'm Joe Biden. I don't bring on Nomi. I bring on, the top epidemiologist in the country. Hey, is what's going on right now make sense to you that these states are doing this? No, sir, it doesn't. Blank, 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 big, big, bing. Okay, let's talk to a supply lines person. Is this appropriate that the federal government is intervening in what's going on with, that Larry Hogan has to send, has to rely on his wife's connections to South Korea to get these testing? No, sir, it's not. But I mean, like, this is rudimentary, basic shit. And if you don't want to do that because you think that Donald Trump is going to sink himself, then get the F off of TV. But don't go on some fucking show and brag about how much goddamn ice cream you have in your refrigerator that is, like, enough to support, I don't know how many people for how many months over the course of this crisis. I mean, it's just like, it's insanity. It's insanity.
This is why I just don't think, I mean, people think I'm crazy when I say this. I don't think they want to win. You have to be like an idiot to not be able to plug in a webcam and give someone a script and tell them, memorize these 3 words and just have the other person come on and talk. I mean, you literally have to be an idiot. I'm serious. I just don't think that I think they're thinking about, maybe Joe Biden thinks that there's some sort of strategy, or maybe Nancy Pelosi thinks, because they're so out of touch with the reality, and they're listening to these advisors who are probably just looking at the numbers and saying, you know what, we're probably not going to win. So we'll place a few ads, take our, get our bucks in. We don't have to spend money on field anymore, so we don't have to pretend that's a thing. And, we'll call it a day. And meanwhile, you've got Andrew Cuomo on TV talking about, real things, which, of course, he's cutting Medicaid and slicing the budget up and privatizing things behind the scenes. But at least he's creating the illusion of being present so that in 4 years, he's the guy they go to. Or as vice president, maybe that's it. He's the only person who is at least pretending to care.
When do we get the clip of Chuck Schumer going on Colbert and showing off his sound sound system and his movie hut or whatever the hell it is? I mean, God.
Maybe Chuck Schumer should teach Joe Biden how to stand in front of a camera. We know he knows how to do that.
Let's take a call. Calling from a 308 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, it's me, Kowalski.
Kowalski from Nebraska. What's happening, Kowalski?
Oh, not much. Just thought I'd give you a little more lively update from the city of Grand Island.
Now, Kowalski is in Grand Island. There is a meat processing plant there, so there's been a cluster of COVID-19 outbreak. What's happening there?
We are about double Omaha, so the largest city of about 300 and some odd thousand, and the one county of Douglas has fewer cases than about 60,000 in Hall. Wow. My farm sits over the flight path for the Meta Chopper, so about twice a day, 2 people are getting flown to Lincoln or Omaha because we have 16 ICU beds at the one hospital here, which actually tends to a larger area of the state, like especially towards the north. So they want to keep 2 beds open for emergencies, so they just keep flighting more people out.
Wow. I mean, I think that I think is analogous to the sirens that people hear or have been hearing. And my understanding is they've diminished in New York. I think that's what it is. It's like transferring folks to different ICU beds when one facility fills up. And what's the sense that people have there? I mean, has it, we're looking.
Most people don't care.
What?
Honestly, that's what I'm getting. By and large, it's affecting the poorer people, the limited minority population. Just sold some hay yesterday to a gentleman who's about 83. He says he's not worried about it. He thinks it's been overblown. He thinks that the people who are getting sick have pre-existing conditions. That's why they're getting sick. So he's basically blaming the individual. And from what I can gather on social media, outside of maybe your centrist circles, which is probably less than half of the state's population out here, that's pretty much the universal feeling. Rather disappointing, to say the least, but like my sister-in-law, she's a nurse. She's said this is really, really serious, and I don't think it's dawned on people that this is going to be a thing till probably 2021. So
that's nuts.
Yeah, definitely not the experience I would thought, especially when Trump has, Fauci out there saying it's a big deal. Like, that's not enough. But I guess there's also the contradictions of, we would need to get the country open, which I don't think a lot of people are really understanding what that's going to mean yet.
And that's why those ads, the Nancy Pelosi ad is so effective for that base, is it's feeding into the economic, then it's completely taking the message away from the actual health crisis. And so when the fear of economics and, whatever's going to happen to the economy in the next few months and beyond outweighs the fear of dying because it's not right in front of them and they don't hear the sirens or they don't see the bodies being transported out of their neighbors' homes, then that's what's going to weigh on them.
Yep. I agree with you. Kowalski, thanks for the call. I mean, I think it's the close proximity to the impact that I think is what is the counterweight, and that might have to be, that might, I don't know, that we may have to see more of that till people the perspective on it changes.
Listen, Sam, I have to say I've been watching a lot of CNN for the last month, but especially the last couple of days. And I'm a little infuriated that they're highlighting these protests so much. And they say things like, oh, let's just make sure to tell everybody there's just a couple of protesters. It's not really reflective of a movement. Well, then stop putting them on TV.
Right.
You know how you guys don't like to profile socialists? Try to do that with these wackos who are affecting all of us. And maybe put more people on, not just to talk about their experience with people, but like what it actually is. Not Chris Cuomo talking about his father, haunting him in his dreams, but actually have doctors on and say, this guy in New York right now, this actor from 42 years old, is going to have his leg amputated because he's been in a coma for the last 2.5 weeks. Tell those stories. No underlying conditions, what it means to not be able to get tested or have no one there to take care of you when you have hot sweats at night and you're tossing and turning and you can't even get up to have a glass of water.
I'm like I say, the next 3 to 6 weeks are going to be really, I don't know, instructive, I guess, as to where, how long this is all going to last. But let's go back to the phones. Calling from a 778 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, it's Lance. I run a little YouTube channel called The Surfs. We do the political comedy stuff.
I've heard of that. The Surfs, yes.
I gotta be honest, Sam. I'm a monstrous fan of you. I wouldn't be exaggerating to say that I've got a pillow that I've drawn your likeliness onto. So it brings me no joy to say what I'm about to say, but I can't help but think that you've been kind of dodging a pretty important debate coming up.
Excuse me?
Well, I've heard it from a number of accounts that you've been avoiding the creationist cat and his challenge to you.
That's interesting, Lance. I don't know too much about what kind of research you guys do over at the Surfs. That's what you call it. But for a guy who has taken the time to draw my picture on a pillow, you sure have a lot of little faith in me. I'll have you know that I have already debated creationist cat. I don't know if that coward will post the video, but I can assure you that I have my own video record of it so that he doesn't cut it up in some way that makes me look bad. But I destroyed him. In fact, if he hasn't posted the video, it's because he's dead. Because I debated him to death, Lance.
I don't know. This kind of sounds like the same logic that Steven Crowder's been saying. I
it's
hear
not.
he said
Actually,
he's already debated you, and you refused to put up that
different.
video.
From Crowder's logic, because Crowder did not debate me. And I just told you that I may have debated that cat to death. That's why you probably haven't heard about it yet.
All right. Well, if that's the case, I guess I'll keep my Sam Cedar Hente pillow in good cleanliness.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And then I will wait for you to call back and apologize when that CC, or as I call him, cowardly cat, posts the video.
All right, that sounds fair, Sam.
Yeah.
Let's wait until then, okay?
All right, fine. We will. Yeah. Canadians coming at me with accusations that they can't back up. I'm not going to take that. No way.
I want to know if the pillow has a beard or not.
I may have to shave just to match the pillow. I may have to shave just because the thing is starting to drive me crazy a little bit. So we've got this situation now where we've got multiple red states that are opening up their economies over the next couple of weeks, really over the next 10 days. Here's Scott Walker on with Neil Cavuto on Fox Business News. I think this was yesterday or the day before, where this is how we're going to reopen the manufacturing sector by abusing the people who work there.
Lights went off. I remember years ago when I was a kid playing sports, if the lights went off at the stadium, you turned them on. It took a while to come back on. That's what the economy is going to be like. There's going to have to be a phase in. I think we start with manufacturing and the trades. Those areas where you physically have to be there and where you can spread people out. You can close down break rooms and lunch rooms and keep people at their actual machinery, at their site. You can do other things to make sure people aren't huddled together and keep those offices where there are cubicles and administrative duties going on, keep them at home longer. I remember
it's a cute little anecdote about how he remembers when the lights went off when he was playing sports as a kid. I mean, I don't know
what does that even mean?
That just means like, hey, let me get into your inner circle of trust by letting you know that I'm just an average guy who played sports in the heartland, played baseball in the heartland. Meanwhile, there are these major clusters of COVID-19 in the Midwest that are and places like South Dakota, Smithfield Foods. We just heard from Kowalski in Nebraska that in his hometown, they have a massive cluster that is also from a processing plant. In Iowa, hundreds of National Guard personnel are being activated because Kim Reynolds sent them to the Tyson Foods and National Beef Packing Companies. These are processing plants. Now, I suppose if you locked these and chained the people who are working there to their workstations, maybe in some way they wouldn't congregate in the break room and give each other COVID-19. Or maybe it's just like you don't want masses of people to gather together in confined spaces, period. And the idea that Scott Walker's just like, we could just have them there. They can't take bathroom breaks. They can't take any food breaks. They can't eat. And they can just, we'll chain them there and they can work and we'll see how it works out.
It's interesting that just these scenarios, I mean, I'm sure there may not even be a pattern, but why are they all meat plants? It's like every factory in the Midwest, I'm surely would have this problem, but it seems like there's some sort of, I mean, it's just because we're providing food, but there are other plants that are essential services.
I would imagine these are the biggest plants that are operating at this time because there's still a demand for food in a way that there probably isn't. If I've got a couch making facility or processing plant, or I don't know, if I'm whatever it is I might be manufacturing, I've got to be looking and saying like, I don't know that I'm going to have demand. So I don't know if I'm going to have like shifts working 24/7 because I don't want to build up an inventory here.
Right.
And
so Wisconsin's like the second largest, or maybe it's the largest paper manufacturer in the country. Harvey K told me that. If he's watching, maybe he can chime in and let us know. I'd be curious to see what's happening over there. If there's still, I don't know if there's a lobbying effort in some way by, I think what I'm trying to figure out is who is lobbying these governments in particular. They're not just right wing, but it's not like Governor Baker who is pushing to reopen business anytime soon in Massachusetts.
Right, indeed. Here is Brian Kemp, governor of Georgia, laying out his plan to open up Georgian businesses on Friday, just 3 days from now. And here he is. He's outlining it. And well, let's play this clip.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm having an issue with my... 1 second.
All right, here we go.
Given the favorable data, enhanced testing, and approval of our healthcare professionals, we will allow gyms, fitness centers, bowling alleys, body art studios, barbers, cosmetologists, hair designers, nail care artists, estheticians, their respective schools, and massage therapists to reopen their doors this Friday, April the 24th.
Oh, man.
Unlike other businesses, these entities have been unable to manage inventory, deal with payroll, and take care of administrative items while we shelter in place. This measure allows them to undertake baseline operations that most other businesses in the state have maintained since I issued the shelter-in-place order.
The idea, apparently, when he talks about tests, that the Augusta University in Augusta, Georgia, is rolling out an app, and they're going to test patients based upon an algorithm.
Oh my God! This is junk science. What is going on, Sam?
I mean,
you need to get your tattoo and go to the bowling alley. because those businesses are affected in ways that other businesses aren't, Sam. I don't know if you know.
It seems to me to be insanity. And the question is going to be like, are people really going to go out and get that tattoo? Like, I mean, according to Kowalski, Nebraska, in some of these areas, and look, we've seen now there is at least one study out there that shows a differential between people who watch Fox News and watch Tucker Carlson or watch Sean Hannity. If you watch Sean Hannity, they measured in counties across the country a 20% increase in deaths from COVID-19 from Hannity. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I mean, these people may just assume I can go in there. And here he is. Here's Brian Kemp basically saying, do we have a second clip of this? Where he basically says, yeah, here's this. He's not doing it for politics, according to Brian Kemp.
Yeah.
I know you're basing your decisions on medical science and data and the best advice you can get medically and economically, but if you could share with us your thought process and how this is weighing on you. This could be one of the most important decisions you will ever make in your personal or political life, because so much depends on getting it right. Reopening too soon, you can imagine the potential consequences of that. What goes through your mind when you think of that?
Well, I can tell you I don't give a damn about politics right now. We're talking about somebody that has put their whole life into building a business that has people that they love and work with every single day, working in many of these places, that are at home going broke, worried about whether they can feed their children, make the mortgage payment. You know, these are tough decisions, no doubt, and I've had to make many of them, and I can promise you I will have to make more of them. But we also got to think about the effects on our economy and on these individuals from a mental health perspective, from a physical health perspective, and literally for people being able to put food on their tables. And I believe that this measured approach has got us to the time to trust our people.
It may be a tough decision. It's also an incredibly stupid one. They are just so determined not to put any pressure on government to step in and provide for those things that he's talking about. Provide for those people to make sure that they have food. Provide for those businesses to make sure that they're able to maintain their payments to their employees. Provide for those businesses and those individuals by putting in a rent freeze or a mortgage freeze. They are so adamant to not do that, that they are basically making the calculation that A, the coronavirus is not really real. You know, this is motivated reasoning. And or B, all that we'll lose are some, extra people.
So here's my, let's just entertain their logic for a second as business people, not politicians, right? Even if that were the case, right? Use entertaining their logic that, okay, business as usual, we're going to let people in, if they get sick or not, we're going to be able to save businesses in Georgia, small businesses in Georgia. There's definitely a chance that at least 50% of whatever their traditional business doesn't come in. So at what point are the losses actually greater in keeping that business open than keeping it closed? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, there are a lot of businesses right now that can operate and they can sell food to go, and they've just decided it's just too expensive even to provide those services and keep those contracts going, even if we're selling 75% or even 100% because of XYZ reasons. Insurance, for instance, providing insurance for your staff.
Exactly. I wonder if Brian Kemp owing more than $800,000 in loans to banks that he helped start may have something to do with it.
Whoa.
That's a story from 2018. He is a real estate investor and property manager. So he very well may want some of that money churning out, does not want to have to turn to a situation where there's any type of rent freeze, because that's a situation where maybe he himself might have some problems. Here it is.
Wow. Good.
That was Brendan.
Investigative reporting, guys. Come on.
I'm making some hard decisions, man. I'm going to have to just, as long as I can pay off these loans, I'm willing to let somebody else's grandma die. I really, honestly, I want full transparency. If you're a governor and you're basically opening up your economy, I want to see your parents, your kids, and you out there on the front lines. You want to prove to everybody this is safe?
Go get a tattoo.
I want Kemp in that tattoo parlor going like, that looks pretty cool. How about you get one with an eagle on there or something?
Yeah, he needs a fresh set of nails, a new haircut, and a new tattoo before we open anything else up.
Before he goes bowling. Oh man.
Here is let's check in on Ben Shapiro. Let's see what the intellectual pillar of the new right has to say about what's going on. This is Ben Shapiro with a caller on the BS show, as he I think he calls it.
I'm sorry, I'm having some trouble with my internet today. 1 second.
We'll get to that in just a moment. Bear with us, folks.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we're going to have to keep paying people that kind of money once this crisis is over to get people to work?
No, not at all. I think that one of the big shockers to people is going to be the fact that when people come back to work, there are now tens of millions of unemployed people, and those are all competition for your wage. I mean, those are all people who you can hire. So there's a vast pool of people right now who are eager to work. And if they're smart, they'll come back to work and work for less with the guarantee that that job is going to be there, 3 months from now, whereas the unemployment check may not be there 3 months from now. So people have to take a little bit of a long-term view. Now, I think a lot of people are thinking my employer is loyal to me. They understand what I'm doing. In 3 months, the job will still be there because right now the market isn't there for them even to hire back up. This is another problem with the CARES Act. The CARES Act basically pays businesses to pay people to be employed, but the CARES Act doesn't restore the market. Right? If you run a business and you are keeping 90% of your payroll in place, but nobody's buying your products, you're just going to lay everybody off the minute that the PPP runs out. The minute that Paycheck Protection Act runs out, you're going to lay everybody off again. And so then if you're an employee, you're like, why would I stay employed? I'm going to stay on the unemployment because in 3 months, either way, I'm not going to have a job. In 3 months, either I get fired because the market hasn't recovered, or in 3 months, I am not going to have a job because I never had a job. So I may as well take the more money for the 3 months. There are a lot of problems with the CARES Act. It's a very poor piece of legislation. It is better than nothing.
Second. First of all, I think Ben Shapiro is lacking knowledge about two things in here. Ever having a real job.
Right.
And anything to do with unemployment.
Exactly.
Well, let's say this for the 5,000th time. To go on unemployment, if you are an employee, you don't make that decision that you're eligible.
Right.
You have to be fired. You can't make the calculation. I would rather be on unemployment if your employer is paying you and not firing you. You can't just decide like, I'm leaving for unemployment. That's not an option. You don't have that option. That doesn't exist. Only in the fevered brain of the intellectual pillar of the right wing who is pontificating on this. And the idea that as a worker, you're thinking, why would I want to stay with this job right now as opposed to go on unemployment, which I don't have an option. I need to be fired if I'm going to. Maybe you want to stay on that job because nobody knows how long this is going to last, or whether there's going to be another round of support. Nobody knows what the future is like. These people are going to predict. No, you stay with the job because either A, you like it, or B, you need to continue to get paid. And if you quit, you don't get paid and you don't get unemployment.
Or your insurance is tied to it, which you don't necessarily get when you go on unemployment.
Exactly. Let's see what else this moron finishes up here with. Boy, he is not.
I'm not going to have a job because I never had a job, so I may as well take the more money for the 3 months. There are a lot of problems with the CARES Act. It's a very poor piece of legislation. It is better than nothing because otherwise the economy utterly would have collapsed because it just stopped dead because the government drove it, as I've said a million times, an F-150 through the front wall. But it's a mess. I mean, the act is a mess.
I love how he's talking about an F-150. Hey, Matt.
He's a man of the people.
Right. Hey, Matt, you're from North Dakota, right? You're going to drive through a wall. Are you going to use an F-150?
Yeah, at least.
At least. You're going to need an F-250, it seems to me, or an F-350 to drive through a wall. F-150, I got news for you, folks. Now, that's not a pickup you drive through a wall. That's the pickup that you drive into town and just basically you never get it dirty.
But it's American, okay? It's American.
So isn't an F-250?
I don't think there is an F-250.
Oh yeah, there's all the way up to 350. Yeah,
I think there's a 450.
Yeah,
350 is. I mean, if I had a truck, it'd be a 350 minimum.
Okay, I'm done with this conversation.
Down to Cumbies.
Wait, the craziest thing about his argument is it's like, let's just not pay workers now, let the economy implode immediately rather than in 3 months. He doesn't understand. I mean, I agree that this bill does not go far enough, but obviously for different reasons. At least it's like the incremental response to dealing with the economy. He's like, no, just let the economy collapse right now. Everybody
I agree with you. They could have gone further, but they passed 10 weeks because nobody had an idea of what the deal was.
Right.
But
he's basically saying, like, let the economy implode.
I can't quite tell what he's saying there. I think he's saying is that, like, he doesn't know anything about unemployment. He doesn't understand the dynamic of people who are insecure about money, that they would actually walk away from a job. It's not like anybody out there is going like, oh, well, yeah, I've got this job, but if I can get on unemployment, I have a sense from what I've been reading from my congressional daily that there's a lot of support to extend unemployment benefits. And of course, I'm looking at what's happening on the state capitol, and I have a sense of where this is headed. No, you stay with the job because you're getting paid. And
I'm so curious. How does his show function? Is he like, this actually could lead to something bigger if he doesn't understand how basic employment works. Is he running his company? And if so, might be worth looking into.
No, he's not running his company. This is, I got a lot of mixed emotions about this one, but they're starting to work out. Here's Brian Kilmeade on Fox and Friends. And whoever the woman who reads headlines is not Ainsley Earhart, right? Is somebody different?
This is one of their like news sting readers. I would call her a news reader, not a like anchor or anything.
All right, check this out. This is people will understand in a moment why I have such mixed emotions about this.
No one is above the law in Tampa, not even the city's new star quarterback.
I always tell people, I'm not one to gossip, so you didn't hear this from me. A lot of our park staff, they patrol around just to make sure that their people aren't in there with contact sports and things. And saw an individual working out in one of our downtown parks, and she went over to tell him that it was closed and it was Tom Brady. He has been cited.
Staff throwing Tom Brady out of the park that is closed over the coronavirus outbreak. Tom Brady joined the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this offseason after 20 years with the Patriots. So there you have it. Not even star power can allow you to work out there by himself. Mm-hmm.
It makes no sense. Not exactly the welcome wagon that he was imagining.
Yes, to both of you. Right.
What an embarrassment.
Yeah. These guys are outraged. First of all, Tom Brady looks like hell. I don't know what's going on with him. He looks like he shaved his whole body. But they don't seem to understand the dynamic that if Tom Brady is working out there alone, other people are going to go, well, if he's working out, why can't I work out? And then all of a sudden,
Tom Brady on top of
people, right? If you're Tom Brady, you should be allowed to work out there. I got news for you. I don't anticipate there being football this fall, but
yeah.
Brady a lot of embarrassment, I think.
The thing they get outraged by is really fascinating to me.
This is all right. He's an American.
It's all part and parcel of them trying to make this whole thing sound like it's completely overblown. Well, then why don't they go into the studios?
Yeah, exactly.
Go into the studios, guys.
Well,
get together.
Having a vision of Colin Kaepernick saying something about Brady shouldn't have gone into the park and that igniting a whole new coronavirus panic.
So I actually have I mean, it's reached crazy levels, but I'm surprised no one's actually, even just to prove a point, sued any of the even low-hanging fruit media like Ben Shapiro for misleading information.
Well, I think people have definitely sued Fox. There's been
for health. I mean, for COVID related reasons.
My understanding is there's a couple of places that have done that. A couple of entities. I don't know about the other places, but I think like you could, it's hard. It's much harder to get data, I would imagine, as to who's watching, where. But if you establish a dynamic, like if someone takes that study and expands on that study and can show that Sean Hannity, his actions in diminishing, like I mean, I don't know if this case is, but hypothetically, I mean, and I am not an attorney, but I have hung around with a lot of these tort lawyers, but I think that what you could do, seems to me, is if you could show that there is a correlation between Hannity's viewership and a rise in COVID deaths, and you can show that Hannity could have or should have known that what he was saying was dangerous. I imagine if you are a municipality, and I don't think this is obviously going to happen because it's happening in popular areas, but if you're a municipality that had to pay for the extra illness that occurred there, you may have an action.
Well, I mean, it could be something like an individual saying, I took my advice from Sean Hannity and he had doctors on, like Dr. Oz and, Dr. Phil, who told me it was okay and that my kids, were going to be fine or whatever the excuse was. Or you could have some like idiot town, clerk or mayor, whoever's making the decisions in a municipality who watches only Sean Hannity, who gets pushback from his community and has to defend himself in some way and say, well, this is the advice I took from, our media.
It's the only thing I can imagine that would in any way sort of like help Hannity in that situation would be the lack of maybe statutory obligations for what he's doing, that he's actually doing anything except for shilling, some product or something. I have no idea, but it'd be an interesting conversation to have with somebody.
We got a tweet already, by the way. Just someone sent it. Undead Noir sent us the Fox News lawsuit for calling COVID a hoax with Sean Hannity. So,
calling from 720 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, it's Dave from Denver.
Yeah, Dave from Denver. What's going on with your phone, Dave?
It might be shit. I'm going through headphones.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Well, the speaker doesn't work itself, so that's the best I got, unfortunately.
All right. Well,
inaudible?
Yeah, it's barely audible. Why don't you just say quickly what's up, and I will, and then we'll let you go.
Well, I want to agree with with some of the libertarians on the right that the economy should be opened up because a lot of people don't have additional income. So it's not just rich people; it's actually a lot of working class people who want the economy opened up just to maintain their income.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's great. And I would like to be able to fly. But the fact of the matter is that just opening up is not going to bring back the income because A, there are other people out there. The polls show the majority of people want to stay at home because they want to make sure it's safe. And B, if you close back up again 3 weeks later because there's another spike, you're going to lose your income again.
Right.
So the other option is to push Congress to start handing out. I mean, there are multiple plans now, hand out $2,000 a month to folks.
Well, even that, though, it's not going to come in for several months, right?
Well,
some people may not get it at all.
Yeah, but you know what? Good luck. We'll see what happens in Georgia when they open up. Maybe businesses will thrive. But in any place where there's been any significant episodes of these infections. You could open up a restaurant tomorrow in New York, but
well, there's like these semi-viral clips of like right-wingers, like the one lady, for example, who wants to get her hair done. So that shows there are people who do want to go out. So it's not like it's zero people.
no, I understand. But if a company,
even for non-essential activities, people still want to.
yeah, Dave.
Even for superfluous non-essential activities.
Yeah, Dave, I get it, but she can go to the hair salon, but and maybe the folks will come in there and work. I don't know. I mean, I frankly think, I appreciate the call. I think citing libertarians and having a bad phone is almost too perfect. But I mean, frankly, there should be protections for workers for not having to go in to work in that situation. Right? Like at the very least, you should be allowed to collect unemployment in the event that you're forced to work in that scenario.
I wonder how, I mean, of the small businesses, how many.
And then all of a sudden, one day I see something pop up and I'm like, oh, what's this majority report thing? And that was actually how I think. So you guys kind of helped me really swing left. I'd always been a liberal, you know, I voted for Hillary, all that stuff. But now I'm like proud to say I'm a leftist. When I came back to the States, I canvassed for Bernie in San Diego the week before Super Tuesday, knocking on doors, all that stuff. So I really want to thank you guys for helping me discover my kind of inner leftist and make me proud to be able to say that. And then I had a quick question, and it was about third party. Actually, it was about something you said 10 years ago. I'm kidding. The caller. It's about third party run. Like I was looking at Ross Perot's run for office. You know, he failed, but he got 20% of the vote. Yep. And I mean, he was kind of a weirdo, and he didn't exactly have like a super strong grassroots apparatus. But if you look at the country, you got 30% of them identifying as Republicans, 29% identifying as Democrats, and then 39% identifying as independents. Then you got Bernie Sanders, who has a huge grassroots movement. He has more money raised than Joe Biden, the Democratic nominee. I'm wondering why we so immediately kind of poo-poo the idea that Bernie Sanders could do a third-party run. They're like, well, he'll lose. But would he? He's an independent. There's that huge segment of the population that identifies as an independent. Then he has support, a huge support in the Democratic base. And then there are those on the right who say, oh, yeah, I'd vote for Bernie over Trump. So I'm kind of curious, why couldn't he really
I'll tell you why.
And run a third party?
I'll tell you why. And first off, I appreciate the thank you for the telling us about how you found the show and whatnot. And I'm glad. And I do think you should talk to somebody, or should have at least.
Yeah, no, I did. I'm actually going to becoming a counselor myself. But
good.
Oh my gosh.
As long as grad school opens up in fall, then I will.
All right. Well, good luck. Well, here, I'll tell you why the situation is different than when Perot. Because George Herbert Walker Bush was hated by the right.
That's right.
And he was, he did not have the approval rating within the Republican Party that Donald Trump does. And it's a very different Republican Party. So it'd be far riskier. And, Perot lost. And he lost by, Clinton won with about 45% of the vote, I think. And Bush had like 42%. And then I think Perot got more or less 20 in there, or 18 or whatever.
And he pulled more from Republicans. Bernie would be pulling from the Democrat.
Yes.
I mean, even people say he has massive Democratic support. He's not taken all of his voters with him. He's taken maybe like a fifth.
Right. And then you're talking a fifth of a third.
Yes.
And so I think could Bernie get 20% in the election? In a general election? Yes, I think so. But he would be taking more from the Democrats. I mean, and
hurting the movement
and hurting the movement long term, definitely. And
It's just, I just don't think that's a viable option in this environment.
Had there not been a Perot, we would not have a Clinton. Like, we have to just honestly say that. Had there not been a Perot, second time around, but even with a charismatic scenario, right?
Or
mathematically,
that large percent of the populace identifying as independents. Like, I didn't really, like that, even though like 40% of the country says that he couldn't draw from that, they would go to one or the other.
I mean, a lot of those independents who identify as independents, they basically vote the same way for a party any given year. And so they just don't want to identify as a Democrat or a Republican.
On a ballot. Okay, that makes sense.
And they may not vote in midterms. They're like, depending on the state. I just love that Jordan Peterson was the gateway drug to Sam Cedar.
Yeah, they're trying to find he was an idiot, because I listened to Sam Harris too, and then I discovered he's a moron, and I'm like, oh man. So it just helped, but it's so dangerous when you're in that moment where you are. If I hadn't been an educated man who, I'd studied science, so I knew Peterson was a lot of gobbledygook, but I can see how people can fall down into that path, because then YouTube started vomiting up all these Stephen Malamute, independent male, like all this weird crap when I was trying. So I was kind of grateful that I was like, I got to find a counterbalance to this, because I can see how people can fall down that, PewDiePie pipeline or whatever you want to call it. And then before you know it, Nazi stuff. You're like, wait, how did I get to the Nazis? So I'm really grateful you guys are out there to kind of counterbalance it.
Appreciate the call, Pat.
Left is best.
Thanks.
All right, take care, guys.
That is the story. I think was his name Caleb. Was it Caleb Kane? Do you guys remember? The young guy, early 20s, who basically fell down that wormhole, and we interviewed him about it at one point. They wrote him up in the New York Times. That algorithm, that's what they do. Let's talk about Donald Trump. This is clip number 1. This is Donald Trump, very upset that it's all about the ventilators. Nobody looks at the good things that I've done. Like, apparently now the story is that his own coronavirus task force basically does their best to ignore him. And they just get up there and play the sort of like backdrop for his daily show that he does. But here, play this.
And yet people don't like to say it. But remember, it was all about ventilators a month ago. Ventilators. Then we fixed it. You don't hear about ventilators. Where is the ventilator? Jeff, you haven't asked about ventilators recently. What's going on? What about ventilators? We're helping other countries now because they can't have. They're very hard to come by, and they take a long time to make, like years. It's incredible the job they've done, that our people have done, and also private companies have done. You talk about the act. We don't like to use it unless we have to, but a lot of times just the fact that you have it gets you everything you need. So, we don't want to embarrass any of the companies, but we have used it on a number of occasions, and it worked, but it works just as well before you have to use it, because they don't want to be embarrassed, and I don't want to embarrass them because they've done a great job.
The thing that
So here's Trump. He doesn't understand anything that's going on in terms of like, why are people not talking about ventilators anymore? Not understanding that the ventilators we needed were because we were concerned that our medical capacities would be in some way superseded. This is the second clip, right? Of him just crying that the press is not in any way like recognizing that we don't need ventilators anymore. And they're moving on to something else.
Testing is a big word. Remember, it was all ventilators. And the reason it was all ventilators, they said there's no way he'll ever be able to catch this one. And not only did we catch it, we are now the king of ventilators all over the world. We can send them anywhere, thousands being made a week. And they're very high quality. And that wasn't playing well. So then they said, testing. Oh, we'll get them on testing. Well, testing is much easier than ventilators. Ventilators are big machines that are very complex, that are very expensive. You need you need a group of people that really know what they're doing. We took auto lines. We took a lot of different people, and now we've done that. But it used to be ventilators. Now it's testing.
That's right, because the testing is now about 6 weeks overdue. Larry Hogan has to go to get his wife with a connection in South Korea to get the testing. We could have gotten the testing from the Germans 2 months ago. But he wanted to run through his buddies. All the tests that are coming out now, apparently the FDA waved them all through, and now they're giving a bunch of false negatives. So they're completely ineffective. This is round 2. He screwed up the testing. And I mentioned this before, and Nomi, welcome back here. We obviously, we lost our internet for a moment, but I'll tell you what you haven't heard much about. Now he's only hearing testing. AP reported 2 hours ago, a malaria drug widely touted by President Donald Trump for treating a new coronavirus showed no benefit in a large analysis of its use in U.S. veterans hospitals. There were more deaths among those given hydroxychloroquine versus standard care. This, according to researchers.
So wait, they were given the hydroxychloroquine instead of standard care, or was in conjunction with? Is there any sense?
I presume they gave them all the other care. It's just they also treated them with
literally endangering them then at that point.
I hope that they asked for their permission to treat them with this drug. Absolutely nuts. Absolutely nuts.
Man. Do you remember, I'm sorry, do you remember during the Iraq War, things were moving so quickly and you couldn't piece together the Eric Princes of the world and how and then it really took us, several years to digest all of it and fantastic, investigative reporters like Matt Taibbi. And I mean, that was a little bit later with the economy, but it's going to take us a while to really process the level of grift attached to the incompetence and the it's not even neglect. I mean, it's almost intentional. I mean, with this pill in particular, if it is actually making it worse, then there are real damages here. I don't know what legal action can be taken, but how long do you think it's going to take for us to kind of get a sense of?
I think it's going to take a lot longer to get a sense of put all of this stuff in context and to dig it out. Well, I mean, I think it's going to take a long, long time. And that is presuming that Donald Trump is not president
right
this time next year.
Right.
If Donald Trump is president this time next year, I don't think we ever find out about it, to be honest with you. Look at where we've come in 4 years.
Because you can't foil, you can't do certain things to.
I think that just there's so many aspects of our government. I think that is just going to be broken.
Right.
That it's going to be extremely difficult to deal with. I mean, I think that's just.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to get. How many thousands of reporters have we lost in this? Thousands thousands. And I don't think these are jobs that are going to come back unless there's some type of restructuring of things.
Right.
I just don't think there are. I just don't think that I think that a lot of people who are in that business are just going to say, like, no way. Mm-hmm. And without things like student debt forgiveness, without things like a free college option, without things like a greater social insurance support, like, healthcare that everyone has, that is paid for out of our taxes, without things like, child
worker protection,
and whatnot. Like
basic worker protection, unions under attack. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about without a certain amount of our needs not being subject to the market.
Yeah.
And not being commodities. I don't see how you rebuild a profession like journalism when it is so precarious, and there's no reason for anybody to imagine that it's not going to be less precarious. I mean, you still have people who go into it, but I can't imagine you'll have that many.
And they're not going to be true. We had this issue. Wayne Barrett, who was one of my mentors, we started this fund in 2012, and it was to help fund independent investigative reporting projects in New York State, because this was right after newsrooms just slashed all investigative reporting. And when we were looking for younger talent, it was tougher, just as, Democrats are having difficulty finding the right talent, progressives are finding, because there was no pipeline. So when you don't have newsrooms training, you can't just learn how to do investigative reporting you do it on the job. It's a real tough skill. You develop sources, et cetera. But, looking at the bailout, and you see, I call the bailout, but you see who's been bailed out. It's monopoly companies. They're not taking the money, or they're using it to protect their own interests and their CEO's interests. There's no process of accountability, and it's not small business or mid-level businesses that are being bailed out. So I think coming out of this, we're just going to see a more concentrated, monopolized,
without a doubt,
than before. Yeah.
Without a doubt. I think that's the biggest problem with the stimulus, is that,
Right.
So they're just, the inequality and the amassing of assets is just going to be enormous.
Yep.
They're just getting all this free money that they're going to go around. They're going to buy all these distressed assets that are going to exist after this.
Yep.
And then the distressed assets will have value. They're not paying much interest on this money at all. It's free, basically loaned to them free.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually they'll pay it back, but they'll have the opportunity to buy all these assets that ultimately will get more. It's a very easy way to make money, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't consider myself a businessman, but I'm quite confident that somebody gives me $1 million or 10 million or $100 million interest free, I will be able to pay it back, and I'll be able to put money in my pocket.
Yep.
Calling from a 920 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, it's Patrick from Houston.
Patrick from Houston. What's on your mind?
Hey, so I just wanted to talk about just where the left goes in general from here. I know you fielded a lot of calls about this, and I know Nomi has probably as well, especially lately with Bernie dropping out. But I just wanted to talk about specifically in traditionally red states, what the left can do. And I just want to preface this by saying that I thought Bernie ran a great campaign in 2020, and that I'm in no position to critique or anything like that. But I just wanted to, share what I thought, could be some good next steps for the left, especially down here in states like Texas. What would you think of really sort of borrowing from traditionally conservative rhetoric in terms of trying to persuade people down here to sort of adopt our policy sets, and using Medicare for all, for example? If we were to attach Medicare for all with traditional conservative buzzwords like liberty and freedom, that the right really sort of uses all the time. If we tried to say that, Medicare for all is truly what freedom looks like and truly what liberty looks like, and it's not, that you only don't have, health insurance through your employer, that you have health care all the time, no matter, regardless if you're employed or not, that's what true freedom and that's what true liberty looks like. What do you think about that sort of rhetoric coming from the left and using in red states?
You're 90 years, 85 years late on that idea. Harvey K would be extremely mad at me if I did not remind you of FDR's For Freedom speech and freedom from want.
Right.
And that, I mean, he would, that's the way he would characterize it, that, you know, Medicare for all. I mean, I would call it, you know, I would say we're going to expand Medicare. I mean, I wouldn't even make it like it's
right.
We're introducing a radical new program. We're going to expand Medicare. It covers everybody. It's actually not Medicare. We're really actually talking about an expansion of Medicaid, you know, in terms of is more closely, I think, attuned to what we'd be offering. But yes, and it will give you the freedom of pursuing jobs that you are more interested in. It will give you the freedom to pursue opportunities and take more risks. It will give you the freedom of not having to worry about your children, you know, getting ill and not having coverage. Yes, I think that is, you know, I think rhetorically that's where we should be headed. I would have liked to have seen Sanders in many ways adopted more of that. I mean, I, you know, was in that, you know, from early on, hoping that he would just call himself more or less an FDR Democrat rather than a Democratic socialist. But from a rhetorical standpoint, I don't know how much of a difference that would have made, frankly. But, you know, and I don't know how much rhetoric at the end of the day is going to make a difference. I think the key is, you know, organizing on the ground and developing sort of like, you know, institutions, even if it's, you know, unions, but also, you know, DSA chapters and all sorts of institutions that exist when there's not elections that mobilize people, you know, any type of associations or social clubs or something like that. I mean, I think that is equally as important, if not more important than sort of like, you know, tweaks in rhetoric. Although with that said, I do subscribe to that idea that, you know, you want to maximize everything and there's no reason to leave something on the table. It's unclear what is going to be the one thing that convinces somebody. I mean, you know, I don't know. I couldn't predict that had we not put, you know, Jordan Peterson's dumb in the title of a YouTube video that we wouldn't have had Pat from California, you know, find the show. I mean, who knows what's going to bring somebody into the tent, but that's, but I would look at that speech, go back and look at that, that For Freedom speech.
It would be interesting to see, I mean, in a state like Texas in particular, where things are so gerrymandered, and it could be a completely different state, instead of, and I, you know, as a member of DSA, I say this, like maybe there are other types of groups, loose identity, you don't even form it, it could be a club, it doesn't even have to be an entity, where you organize on Medicare for All and go to maybe lower income conservative neighborhoods and start talking to people door to door and saying, you know, relating to their issues, meeting them where they are. That's something I think that was really lost in the Bernie Sanders campaign and just, and frankly, the movement a little bit in the last few years, is meeting people where they are and bringing them in. We keep saying that Bernie's message and his policies appeal to conservatives and independents, but tactically it wasn't happening. And I think that's the work that we need to be doing right now is, you know, if we just keep speaking to Democrats and progressives because of gerrymandering, because, you know, Texas and Arizona and you know, Georgia are so anti-union, it's going to be harder to have that kind of organizing on the ground the way that you would in Wisconsin, where you have a real battle there. So how do you as individuals move as, you know, and meet people where they are, and have these conversations to bring them into the camp of being for Medicare for all? You gotta, like, you know, it's and it can't be done with things like,
That's what I say.
Targeted ads, right?
303 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Eric from Ohio.
Eric from Ohio. What's on your mind?
Not a whole lot. I was wondering if you wanted to talk about the Green New Deal and why I don't think it'll be as good for the environment, but better for jobs.
Why you don't think? Well, sure. Go ahead.
So I work in the auto industry, so things are a bit rough at the moment, but the incentives I've seen in the Green New Deal are mostly on the consumer side. And considering it takes about 5 to 7 years to make a car, any gains we get could be not seen until 2025, 2026. So I'm just a bit worried that any just consumer side incentives, tax rebates, that kind of stuff versus a mandate like they have out in China wouldn't necessarily be seen in time. So we'd have to actually mandate you need to make X amount of products at X price, or you're not going to get these contracts type of thing.
Well, what about just like raising cafe standards at an accelerated pace?
That's a start, but all that would do is incentivize the luxury end of electrification and still have to maintain the combustion engines. It's not going to work towards electrification.
I would say that one of the problems with cafe standards, and maybe you need to modify the way that they're applied, is that it basically just does an average across a fleet, and that's what you're talking about. And in fact, my uncle at one point owned a car dealership, Chrysler car dealership, and so I know this story that Chrysler, when the cafe standards, and I don't know when this was, maybe 20 years ago, cafe standards were raised. Chrysler bought this electric car company that just made those electric vehicles that you see at the football game where they drive, where they somebody gets injured and they ride them off, and then these like little combination,
they're like golf carts,
flatbeds. And that GEM electric car company brought down the average of its cafe fleet. And of course, those things aren't even, maybe they're like they're roadworthy in like places like, I don't know, like downtown Charleston. I don't know. Like you see them like in places like that, like where they're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And,
well, the trouble is it's not that they don't have the technology or know how to do so. Both GM and Honda are currently making the equivalent of like the Tesla Model Y in China for about $10,000 less for sale right now. So kind of has about the incentives of California in terms of their electric cars. So it's possible for them to just bring that over to the U.S., but there's no government incentive to do so. And that's why you only see electric cars out on the West Coast, because they have their state mandates. A lot of car companies, I think 10 or 15, voluntarily accepted the CAFE standards without the zero emissions mandate, as opposed to Trump's cutbacks.
Right.
But there's no electrification. So that's where I'm worried that, sure, you're getting minor improvements every year, but there's no incentive for them to invest in that technology. They're just waiting for Tesla's technology or whoever's technology to become cheap enough for them to start using it.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good point. I mean, I'm not, I would be more concerned about that omission if I thought passing the Green Deal was imminent. But, I don't think there's no piece of legislation that we've seen that's been introduced that is going to end up being the legislation that gets passed, for better or for worse in some instances. And so, I think, I imagine that if we're in a position to pass anything that's even remotely resembling a Green New Deal, somebody would pick up on that. But that's a good point.
And I remember when AOC first got elected, or won the nomination, environmental groups, it was sort of behind. I don't think many said anything publicly. Were frustrated that the Green New Deal was being championed, at least in the form that had been presented, because of course she didn't write it, because it didn't go far enough. And that was something that was brought up by a lot of those groups. I guess they lost that fight though. So,
all right, let's take one more phone call. Pick a number, Naomi.
7.
Pick another number, Naomi.
Up to what?
Between 2 and 9.
Okay, 9.
All righty. Well, how about, here we go. Okay. Calling from a 971 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? They hung up.
3.
Wait, here he is. 971. 971. 971 once, 971 twice. Bye-bye. I'll take the next one down on the line. Calling from a 416 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Sam. Just a sec.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi.
Who is this?
Cool.
Where are you
my
calling
name
from?
Yes, my name is Steve. I'm calling from Toronto.
Steve from Toronto. You're the final caller of the day, Steve.
Hey, cool. I have two questions for you. I don't have to get to both of them, but the first one is good because it's related to something I heard Nomi say last week. Hi, Nomi. How's it going?
Good. How are you, Steve?
I'm okay, thanks. So I heard Nomi mention this last week or maybe the week before related to Bernie Sanders dropping out of the race. And in the long discussion that was going on that show, Nomi had said that the Democratic Party is setting itself up to lose the election, or it mentioned that as like a strategy or something that party has in this election. And I wanted to ask if you're able to sort of provide an explanation of the mechanics of that, I guess, for the benefit of those people in the audience who may not be really astute, or people calling from other countries who may be wondering about that statement. So that's my question.
I appreciate the call.
Yeah.
I mean, say I don't necessarily agree with this.
I know you don't. I know you don't. No one does. But I think it's the mechanics of the Democratic Party are very are structured, interpreted, built around a few people keeping the control, a few people who have been appointed by the chair, a few people that make a lot of money off of these billion-dollar campaigns. And these are the same people who are doing absolutely nothing right now but phoning it in for Joe Biden. And, you know, it's even better for them now because they don't even have to pretend to do field programs and hire all these campaign. I mean, they can take pretty much the majority of the money and put it towards ads and digital and make them look glossy. I mean, Joe Biden's ad that he did on China was very well constructed, really bad message, but very well constructed. And I think their argument is, you know, well, these are the voters we lost last time, so we have. But there's no political science and history that shows that that's actually something that works. And so as much as they might have an argument like this is their strategy, the problem is that strategy has proven over and over again to not work. And at this point, you know, we've had commissions discussing this. They have the evidence in front of them. And I just think that they are looking at the numbers and saying, you know, we're probably going to lose this. Just like, you know, the Republicans probably thought with McCain after George Bush, who had the lowest approval ratings probably in modern history, I think, of politics, of presidential politics. And they thought, all right, well, McCain, we're going to hand it to him. McCain has run a few times. He's an elder statesman. Doesn't mean that he's, you know, he's in the inside of the Republican Party. And when is the last time a vice president didn't get the nomination? So I really think that they're thinking about where they go 4 years from now. That Trump has solidified his base so much and solidified the folks that were the swing voters in 2016. And they're doing absolutely nothing to win over the left or excite the base, I should say. You know, it's not that the left hasn't turned out for the general election nominee. It's that they're not doing anything to excite their base. And Democrats need to have the perfect storm of an excited base, win over that swing voter, and a really unpopular Republican. And they just know that Trump is, you know, just hasn't hit that mark yet. Why not make money along the way?
All right. And I agree with the money make along the way. And I think, you know, Nancy Pelosi, I have a feeling is like, my job is not to worry about the presidential election. Mm-hmm. My job is to worry about those, you know, dozen House seats in Republican territory. And so I'm going to get on and show my Sub-Zero freezer as if that's going to help in some fashion. But if it's the case that these, you know, top Democratic apparatchiks, whoever they are, made the assessment that they can't beat Trump, why wouldn't they have allowed for Bernie to be nominated? Because if you want anybody to lose in that scenario, you'd rather have Bernie lose than Biden. Because if Biden loses,
they can't make money off of Bernie because they're not going to be Bernie's consultants.
Fair enough.
Bernie's going to bring in his, I mean, with that also comes taking over the convention, taking over the message. So if Bernie is for Medicare for all, you think Bernie's going to sit back and say no to Medicare for all? No, it's the convention is a commercial for the agenda that the incrementalist agenda. And their slate of, future candidates, the Gretchen Whitmores, the Kamala Harris's,
They don't get their platforms. Yep.
They don't get their platforms. And why would they give him the stage? Just like, why would CNN put a leftist on to debate anything right now? And they have no problem showing the protesters out there over and over again. And there's one person in Ohio who's like, you know what? I feel that way. Maybe I'll show up now to my local protest. And then that's how the Tea Party grows.
Well, to be continued, Nomi. Always a pleasure. Folks, check out Nomi Keys show on patreon.com, The Nomi Keys Show.
And YouTube.
And YouTube, Nomi Key Const.
Good. Nice.
Yeah. Folks, see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally